don't know if you can see him or not, but there's Rocky. If you're able to see him, I'm going to take a leap of faith and assume you can. He's having a good sleep. It's getting on to late at night here. Anyway, my phone kind of did its usual trick of running out of memory and quit on me. I just deleted a bunch of stuff. I'm uploading the first part of my story as we speak. I'll continue the story now of my experience with a drug called Haldol, or haloperidol is another name for the same drug, which occurred in 1976 when I was 8 years old. Anyway, in the previous part of the video, I described how I'd been given the pills. I had my lunch. Everything was good until then. Then I ate some ice cream for dessert, and I got real cold. And ended up, I took a seizure is what actually happened, but I didn't know that. At 8 years old, I had no understanding of that. And a nurse, as they were holding me down on my bed, was yelling in my face, blaming me, saying that I was in that state because I had eaten this little cardboard or paper tub of ice cream, after lunch, and that I was a greedy little boy, and that I was bad, and that's why this was happening. Anyway, I went unconscious, and I woke up sometime after dark. Now, of course, this was in October. It was October of 1976, so, in October it gets dark around 6:30, 7 o'clock, so whatever, I gotta figure it was after dark. It was around 1 o'clock when this happened, so I gotta figure I was out for about 6 hours, maybe longer. At least 6 hours anyway. I was unconscious. I don't know what time I actually woke up. I just know that it was dark when I woke up, so it had to be at least 6 hours that I was out. When I woke up, I didn't feel too bad. My 2 roommates were asleep. I had two other guys that shared the room with me. There was a Pakistani fella by the name of Rupinder. He was 15 years old, and I'll talk about those guys later. They were pretty good guys, but they had both been through quite a bit anyway. But I'll talk about them later. Another fella that I shared the room with was a 20-year-old man named Bruce, and again I'll talk about him too a little later. Bruce was actually pretty good to me. And poor Rupinder, if you knew what had gone on with him, it was heartbreaking, really. A lot of stuff that just should never have happened. Really, a lot of stuff they both had to endure that should never have happened. And it wouldn't happen these days, but, the world as it was back then was different anyway, so we have our problems now, and it's not good a lot of the time, but we had our problems back then too, just different problems is all. Anyway, back to the drugs. Here we go, back to the drugs. I woke up, and I didn't feel too bad. I actually didn't, and I got up out of my bed, and I walked around the room a little bit. Of course, I tried not to wake up the other guys. I wasn't trying to disturb anybody. I was just felt the need to get up, and it was dark, too. The lights were off because everybody was asleep. So it was probably considerably more than 6 hours that I was out, because the 2 other guys had already gone to bed and gone to sleep. But I really don't know what time it was when I came to. But anyway, pardon me with my sniffling here, but anyway, what had happened was, I started walking around the room, and I didn't feel too bad. But then I found that my head kept wanting to do this, And at first I was able to make it go back down, but then it got that I had to kind of put my hand on the top of my head and push and I could force my head back down. And that frightened me, because my head wanted to do this, and that frightened me. Again, these things would happen, and I wouldn't know why they were happening. I would guess it had something to do with whatever they dosed me up on, but I really didn't understand it, and it was frightening. And they never told us anything, they just do things to you, and you never knew what was going to happen. But whatever happened was generally not good. You generally wouldn't enjoy it. So you knew there was some ordeal ahead of you whenever they did anything to you. Or whenever they came to get you to take you somewhere, you knew there was some ordeal waiting for you on the other end of that journey. So, there was a lot of just fear, and fear of the unknown, and just not knowing what was going on, and being frightened by it. And really, when you're 8 years old and that's happening to you, you don't know that you're going to be all right. You really don't. You have no sense of that when you're 8 years old. But I was afraid to ask for help. I was afraid to go out of that room and go down to the nurse's station and ask for help, because I remembered that nurse scolding me, that nurse yelling at me. And I thought, I did this to myself. I believed her that I had, by eating that little tub of ice cream, that I'd done myself all that damage. And the last thing I wanted to do was to open myself up to more trouble. I was scared. I was afraid to ask for help, and I was ashamed to ask for help, because I thought I did this to myself, so I just have to deal with this by myself. And that really was the mentality of those times too. You didn't air your dirty laundry in public. This video that I'm making now, if this technology had existed in those days, you would never see a video like this. People wouldn't make videos like this talking about these kinds of things. That's probably why there was so much alcoholism back then, because a lot of people had a lot of stuff bottled up. I laid in my bed. I was scared. I was really scared, and I was ashamed because I thought I had done it to myself. And I laid there and I cried. And my neck just was up like this, and I couldn't move it. And then it got that I had trouble breathing. I could only take very shallow breaths. I could barely breathe, and I thought, I'm choking to death. I'm not going to live. And I was really scared. And I laid there and I just cried. Just quietly cried, the tears running down into my pillow, down the side of my face. And anyway, I laid there like that, staring at the ceiling and just taking very shallow breaths until morning. And of course, when they came in and saw me in that state, they put me in a wheelchair. They wrapped me all up in a blanket, and they put me in a wheelchair. And they wheeled me down the hall to the solarium so that they could be on display, I guess. I don't know. They could have hung Christmas decorations on me if they wanted to at that point. I was just a vegetable, just a lump in a chair, And I'm sitting there in a wheelchair, and my neck's all up, and I'm, up like this, looking at the ceiling pretty much. I could see out with my peripheral vision. I could see around the room some, but that was about it. And of course, I could hear the conversations. Other people that were there were talking. They were saying, what on earth are they doing to him? Why, like that, There were people saw it. I remember there was one girl in there. It's kind of funny. She was a black girl, and she was an anorexic. And coming from a little town, I'd never seen a black person in person before. So that was unusual for me. And when I first arrived there, we were sitting in that same room, in that solarium. And I remember I saw the palms of her hands, and the palms of her hands were pink. And she was very dark, but the palms of her hands were pink. Of course, being an 8-year-old boy, I had no filter. And I asked her about it. I said, I didn't realize that you got pink hands. Your hands are pink. And she said, well, yes, they are. And I says, I never saw that. I never thought, I said, I never saw anybody like you before, I said, in person. And I said, I had no idea that black people have pink hands. And the palms of their hands are pink. And she said, oh, yes, yes. And she said, in fact, the soles of my feet are pink, too. And she took off her shoes and she showed me. put her feet up there and showed me the soles of her feet. And I remember I started to laugh, and I said, well, don't that mean all? I said, I had no idea, you know. Anyway, she was a good sport about it. She knew that I wasn't coming from a bad place. I just didn't know, you know. Anyway, I kind of remember her fondly because she was older than I was. She's probably 12 or 13 years old. She was an anorexic girl. And she really had a lot of patience with a little ignorant little 8-year-old boy that didn't know any better than to ask those kinds of questions, you know, and then to talk to her the way I did. And like I say, I never meant anything wrong by it. I honestly was taken by surprise when I saw that black people have pink palms and stuff. I had no idea, you know, prior to that. But I remember she was sitting there and she's saying, oh my, what are they doing to that child? For she was a child herself, mind you, but I mean, I was even a younger child and she took pity on me. And I remember her sitting there and I remember being quite embarrassed about it at the time, you know. I remember being embarrassed to be seen in that state. And damned if they wouldn't come in, and because I couldn't swallow anymore. I could barely breathe. I couldn't swallow. What did they do? They come in and they start shooting me up with haloperidol. Start giving it to me and bring in a syringe and shoot me up with the stuff. Stick a syringe in my arm. You know, and they did that every day. They'd wheel me down there and they'd shoot me up with haloperidol. And anyway, I couldn't swallow or anything. They used to take me to my room. They'd put me on an IV drip so I didn't starve to death. It was bad anyway. Put me in a diaper. Had to change my diapers. You know, all that business. They do that when they did the IV drip so I didn't starve to death. And they kept me in that state for a solid week. And then, you know, sometimes I believe really God looks after us. Because normally my parents would say ahead of time if they were coming up from Perth to see me. That was a big trip to come from Perth to Toronto, you know. And normally they would say ahead of time if they were going to do that. But they just showed up unannounced. And my dad had a temper. And my dad, you know, like I say, me and my dad, we had kind of a rough relationship in a lot of ways. And I was afraid of my dad because he used to beat me. But my dad would also lay down his life to defend me. You know, he would never allow anybody to hurt me and get away with it. If he knew about it, there'd be big trouble. And he walked in there and he saw me in the state I was in. And he flew into a rage. And he said to the nurse that was in there, he said, get the doctor down here now. And the nurse, she says, the doctor doesn't have time to be dealing with the likes of you. And I remember hearing her say that, and I remember thinking, boy, that's a mistake, you know. Talking to him that way, you know, you're making a big mistake. And my dad said to her, he said, well, it's like this. Either he comes down here, or I go up there and get him. He said that if I got to go up there and get him, he's coming down rough if I got to go up there and get him. I said, it's going to be a damn rough trip down here if I have to go up there to get him. So I said, you get him down here. It's in his own best interest that you get him down here. So she went into another little office there and she picks up one of the black telephones, you know, that we had years ago, the big heavy black telephone receiver. And you hear her on there, she's looking all perplexed through the big glass window there out into the room. And my dad's standing there hovering over me and he's saying, you know, don't worry, boy, we're going to straighten this out. This ends now. We're going to straighten it out. And anyway, and she come out of the room, she said, he's coming down. So my dad went over and he stood by the elevators. And I could see him out of the corner of my eye standing there waiting. And of course you could hear the elevators would ding. Every floor that when they were going up or down, you'd hear ding, ding, you know. Anyway, the doors opened up, and my dad reached into the elevator, and the doctor came out on the end of my dad's arm. He had him right by his shirt, pulled him out of the elevator. And he says, come in here and see my son. He said, see what you've done to him. And he dragged the doctor into the room, and he said, whatever the hell you've got him on, he said, you better get him